The quiet memory that shook the room. The evening was calm, yet inside the large hall there was a silence filled with heavy feelings. People waited, but they did not know what was about to come. When Narendra Modi slowly stood up, his voice was steady, but his eyes carried a softness rarely seen. The audience thought he would speak about policies, about progress, about technology. But instead, he began with words that no one expected. He spoke about his father, Damodardas Mulchand Modi. He said his father was a man of few words, but every action of his carried respect, humility, and dignity. Narendra Modi's voice shook as he described how his father sold tea at the railway station, yet never allowed poverty to steal his kindness. He told everyone that his father taught him that greatness is not about power, but about how one treats people who cannot give anything in return. Sundar Pichai, who sat quietly in the front row, felt an unusual weight in his heart. He had heard leaders before, but this was different. It was not the tone of a politician. It was the voice of a son remembering the struggles of his father. Sundar thought of his own journey, of leaving India, of facing uncertainty in a foreign land, and of the small moments when his parents gave up their comfort for his future. As the story went deeper, Narendra Modi described a moment from his childhood. He said that one night, after a long day, his father came home with almost nothing. The children were hungry and the house was quiet. Yet Damodardas placed the little food he had in front of the children and told them to eat first. He himself went hungry. That sacrifice stayed in Modi's heart forever. The hall remained silent. There were no camera flashes, no whispers, no distractions. People listened like children hearing a story by the fire. Modi's words painted the image of a man who worked in silence, who gave in silence, and who loved without asking for anything back. Sundar Pichai's eyes lowered for a moment. He remembered a day when his mother sat late at night stitching clothes to save money for his books. He felt the same quiet sacrifice. He knew that Modi was not only speaking about his father, but about every parent who silently carries the burden of their child's dream. The story then took an unexpected turn. Modi said that one day, as a boy, he asked his father why he never complained about the hardships of life. His father smiled and said, "When you respect life, life respects you back." Modi paused at this line, and the room felt a sudden wave of emotion. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. There was a visible shift in Sundar's mind. He was a man who had built technology used by billions, yet at that moment he felt like a small boy again, reminded of the foundation on which his life stood: respect, humility, and kindness. These were not just lessons from books. They were the very ground on which families like his and Modi's were built. The audience could sense a deeper message forming. It was not about politics or power. It was about remembering where one comes from, about the resilience of ordinary people, and about how kindness in the smallest corners of life can shape the future of a nation. The moment grew even more intense. When Modi admitted that many times in his political life, he felt exhausted, judged, and misunderstood. In those times, he remembered his father's tired face, and it gave him strength. He said that his father's life was a reminder that one must stand tall even when the world is against them, because dignity is never given. It is lived, Sundar. Pichai felt goosebumps. He realized he was not just listening to a leader, but to a son who still carried his father's lessons like hidden treasures in his heart. He thought about how these values could guide not only politics or business, but humanity itself. And in that silent hall, people felt their own memories rise. They thought of their parents, of the silent sacrifices, of the times when love was shown not in words but in actions. The hook of this moment was powerful. No one expected Narendra Modi to speak in such a way. No one expected Sundar Pichai to sit so still, as if each word was carving itself into his mind. This was not only a speech, it was the beginning of a journey that would connect hearts, create conflict between pride and humility, and reveal truths hidden behind power. The silence. That changed Sundar. The room was still echoing with the weight of Modi's words when Sundar Pichai lifted his head. His face remained calm, but inside his heart was unsettled. He was a man used to data, logic, and structured thoughts. Yet now, in that hall, his mind was full of memories, feelings, and questions he had not asked himself in years. He remembered being a young boy in Chennai, sitting at a small wooden table with his brother. His father, an electrical engineer, would explain how every small wire, every small circuit, could change the flow of energy. Sundar often wondered why his father worked so late, why his mother saved money by reusing every little thing. Now, listening to Modi speak about his father's silent sacrifices, Sundar felt the old memories sharpen. He realized that his own story was not so different. But there was another layer to the silence. Sundar noticed how the audience shifted in their seats. These were leaders, executives, and ministers. Yet none of them interrupted. None of them coughed or whispered. It was as if Modi's memory of his father had touched a wound inside each person present, a wound of love, loss, and unspoken respect. Sundar's mind went back to the day he left India for the United States. His father had quietly borrowed money for his ticket, and his mother had hidden her tears until he was gone. He had promised himself that he would work hard, that he would make their sacrifices worth it. But in the rush of success, he sometimes forgot the roots of his journey. Now, in front of Modi's voice, he felt that forgotten promise rising again like a wave. Narendra. Modi then shared another moment. He said there was a day when his father stood in front of a group of strangers who insulted him for being poor. Instead of reacting with anger, Damodardas folded his hands and said, "Your words cannot take away my honesty." Modi admitted that as a child, he felt angry, even ashamed. But as he grew older, he understood that humility in the face of insult is a strength greater than revenge. Those words pierced Sundar like an arrow. He remembered his own challenges, when people doubted him, when he was the outsider in rooms full of confident voices, when he felt invisible. There were times he wanted to fight back, but his parents had always taught him patience, and now he saw how Modi's father had lived that same lesson. A conflict started inside Sundar. He was a CEO, a global leader. His role demanded power, decisions, and firm words. Yet deep inside, he was still that boy whose strength came from quiet humility. Listening to Modi, he wondered if he had lost a part of that innocence. Had he let the noise of the world bury the silence of his roots? The audience, too, was restless. Some looked down, some looked at Modi with wide eyes, some even wiped silent tears. This was not the kind of speech they expected. This was not about numbers, charts, or achievements. This was about the invisible force of kindness that holds broken families together, that keeps hungry children hopeful, and that guides leaders when they forget their way. Sundar felt an unexpected pull. It was as if Modi's words were not only memories, but also a mirror. In that mirror, Sundar saw his own father's face, tired yet hopeful, proud yet humble. He remembered his mother's gentle hands, the way she would place food in front of him before taking any for herself. The suspense in the hall deepened when Modi's voice grew softer. He said, "People think success is about climbing. But my father taught me that true success is about holding others while you climb." For a moment, Sundar thought the hall would break into applause, but no one moved. The silence was louder than any sound, and in that silence, Sundar's heart beat faster. He felt as if a choice was waiting for him, a path he could not ignore. He knew he would not leave that hall the same man. The conflict now was clear. Sundar had to decide whether to carry this lesson back into his life, his company, his decisions, or let it remain only as an emotional moment in a hall. The stage was set. The audience waited. But inside Sundar Pichai, The real story had only just begun. When memories turned into questions, the night after that powerful gathering, Sundar Pichai sat alone in his hotel room. Outside, the city lights sparkled, but inside his mind there was only quiet. Modi's words about his father kept circling like waves that refused to settle. He thought about how his own father, Raghunatha Pichai, used to take him on long walks when he was young. They would walk through narrow lanes where the smell of tea and dust mixed with the sound of cycle bells. His father would speak softly about patience and about how every small decision creates a chain of change. At that time, Sundar thought these talks were simple stories. But now, after hearing Modi speak of damodardas, he understood the depth behind such words. Yet along with the warmth of memory came a sharp unease. Sundar asked himself a question he had avoided for years. Had he truly honored the sacrifices of his parents? Yes, he had worked hard. Yes, he had become a global leader. But had he kept their values alive in his heart, or had he allowed the noise of power to drown them? This question burned him. It was like standing in front of a mirror, where the reflection did not smile back. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his senior team members at Google, reminding him of a tough decision awaiting him back in California. A group of employees were demanding changes that would affect both profit and workplace culture. Sundar knew the numbers, the risks, and the strategies. But now, Modi's words about respect and humility whispered in his ear. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His father's tired hands appeared in his imagination. He remembered how his father never chose the easy path if it meant hurting someone else. And then he remembered Modi's story. Damodardas folding his hands in front of insults, choosing dignity over anger. This was the conflict Sundar felt growing inside him. He realized leadership is not only about sharp minds, but also about steady hearts. Back in the hall earlier that day, Sundar had noticed something else that unsettled him. When Modi spoke, there were moments of silence so deep that people seemed almost afraid to breathe. Sundar had led many conferences where people clapped loudly, but he had never seen silence carry such weight. That silence was not empty. It was full of emotion, full of truth. It was like when a river pauses before, breaking into a waterfall, heavy with energy. He now wondered if he could bring such truth into his own work. Could he create silence that spoke louder than applause? Could he lead in a way that touched not just the minds but the hearts of people? These thoughts kept him awake. He paced the room, his mind restless. He knew this was not only about his company. It was about himself, about what kind of man he wanted to be when no cameras were around, when no spotlight was shining. The night grew late, yet Sundar could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face and Modi's voice blending together, reminding him that respect and kindness were not weaknesses. They were the strongest pillars any man could carry. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is not about the past. Maybe it is about what I do next." And with that thought, Sundar realized that his life was moving toward a test. He did not know how or when, but he knew something was coming. The first test of silence the next morning. Sundar Pichai boarded his flight back to California. The sky outside the plane was calm, but his heart carried a storm. He replayed Modi's words again and again, as if they were stitched into his memory. When he reached the office, the atmosphere was tense. The issue he had been warned about was waiting for him like a shadow at the door. A large group of employees had raised concerns about a new project. They believed it would affect people unfairly, while investors believed it would increase profits. Sundar stood in the middle of two fires, and he knew that whichever path he chose, someone would be hurt. As he walked through the corridors of Google's headquarters, Sundar felt the eyes of hundreds of people watching him, some with trust, some with doubt, and some with silent expectation. The weight of leadership pressed on him harder than ever. He entered the conference room. The walls were lined with screens showing charts, graphs, and financial predictions. Executives sat stiff, their eyes sharp with numbers. Across the table sat a group of employees, their eyes filled not with numbers, but with fear and frustration. For a long moment, Sundar did not speak. He listened. He listened to the executives who spoke about profit margins, competition, and deadlines. He listened to the employees who spoke about dignity, fairness, and the future of the workplace. Every word struck him like a stone. Inside his mind, he remembered Modi's father standing quietly in the face of insult. He remembered his own father walking miles to save money so Sundar could study. Both men had chosen dignity over comfort, honesty over quick reward. The silence in the room grew heavy. Some thought Sundar was uncertain, others thought he was weak. But Sundar was not silent because of fear. He was silent because he was searching for truth. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried a firmness that silenced even the restless. He said, "Success is not only about what we build, but about how we build it. If the foundation of our work ignores respect, then the building will not stand, no matter how high it rises." His words surprised many. Some executives frowned, others leaned back in doubt. But the employees sat straighter. They saw not just a CEO, but a human being who understood their voice. Sundar continued, "We will not choose profit over people. We will find a way where both can stand together, even if it takes more time." There was resistance. Sharp voices rose from the investor side. One man said, "This will cost us millions." Sundar looked at him and replied softly, "My father once told me that money lost can be earned again, but respect lost never returns." The room fell silent. In that moment, Sundar felt a strange calm. It was not the calm of victory, but the calm of truth. He realized he had carried Modi's father's lesson into his own battlefield. When the meeting ended, there were no loud celebrations. But as Sundar walked out, he noticed the employees' eyes were different. They carried hope. They carried trust. Yet Sundar also knew that his choice had created enemies. Whispers began in corners. Doubts spread like thin smoke. The challenge was not over. It had only begun. As he stepped outside the building, he felt the same question. Return. Had he chosen the harder road? Maybe. But he also knew that only the harder road leads to the place where dignity lives. And somewhere in the distance of his memory, he could almost hear Modi's words again. True success is about holding others while you climb. When storms began to rise, the days after Sundar's decision were not calm. The employees felt encouraged. Their trust in him grew stronger, but the investors and some executives were restless. Whispers filled the air, whispers that accused Sundar of being too soft, too slow, too emotional for a leader of a giant company. One evening, Sundar sat alone in his office, the city lights glowing outside the glass walls. He had a letter in his hand, sent from a powerful investor. The words inside were sharp. Leadership is about strength, not about emotions. If you continue like this, you will weaken the future of the company. The words burned him, not because they hurt his pride, but because they echoed the very doubts he carried within. Had he made the wrong choice? Had he risked too much? He closed the letter and leaned back, his eyes heavy with thought. Suddenly, a memory returned to him. He was a young boy again, standing beside his father at a small electronics shop. His father had once been offered extra money to give faulty parts to a customer. Sundar had watched him quietly refuse. That day, his father told him, "A strong man does not fear losing money. He fears losing his truth." Those words gave Sundar strength, but they also reminded him of the battle he now faced. The next week, he attended a global summit. Leaders, businessmen, and innovators from around the world were present. Narendra Modi was also there. As Sundar entered, he noticed Modi speaking with calm authority, yet with the same humility he had shown before. When their eyes met, Sundar felt something stir inside him. It was not just respect. It was a silent reminder of the story about Damodardas Mulchand Modi. Sundar thought, if Modi could carry his father's lessons into politics, why can I not carry my father's lessons into business? Yet the storm grew louder. During the summit, a heated debate broke out. A group of global leaders argued that success requires speed, power, and sacrifice of small values. One of them even pointed at Sundar and said, "This man is too cautious. His kindness will one day be his downfall." The words hit Sundar hard. For a moment, the hall became silent, and all eyes turned to him. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. He could have defended himself with statistics, with numbers, with graphs. But instead, he remembered Modi's story again, the image of Damodardas folding his hands, calm even in the face of insult. Sundar stood up slowly. His voice was steady but soft. He said, "Maybe you are right. Maybe kindness slows us down. But I believe kindness also keeps us standing when everything else falls. Without respect, our progress is empty." The hall was quiet. Some leaders shifted uncomfortably, some nodded, and some stared at him with surprise. It was not the answer they expected, but it was an answer that carried weight. Later that night, Sundar walked through the quiet streets outside the summit. His mind was heavy, but his heart felt strangely light. He knew the storm around him was not ending, it was only beginning. There would be more resistance, more voices against him, more battles to fight. But as he looked up at the night sky, he remembered his father's tired yet proud face. And he remembered Modi's words about climbing while holding others. Sundar whispered to himself, "Storms do not destroy the mountain. They only test if the mountain is real." The breaking point, the storm Sundar feared, finally arrived. Weeks after the summit, the pressure on him reached its highest point. Investors pushed harder, media headlines questioned his leadership, and even some trusted colleagues began to doubt him. One morning, he sat at the head of a long table in a tense meeting. The walls of the room seemed to close in as sharp voices filled the air. One executive slammed his hand on the table and said, "This is not the time for emotions, Sundar. The company needs results, not stories." Sundar felt his chest tighten. For a moment, he wondered if they were right. Was he truly risking too much? Was he letting his father's quiet values guide him in a world that demanded speed and power? The conflict inside him grew heavy. But then, through the noise, a memory surfaced. It was the same hall where Narendra Modi had spoken about Damodardas Mulchand Modi. Sundar remembered the silence that had filled the room that day, the kind of silence that carried truth deeper than any argument. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When he opened them, he spoke slowly, carefully, but with a force that no one expected. Strength is not shown by crushing others. Strength is shown when you lift others, even while you carry your own weight. If we forget this, then we may win money, but we will lose ourselves. The room froze. No one moved. His words hung heavy in the air. Some faces showed anger, some confusion, but a few showed quiet respect. That evening, Sundar returned home exhausted. He sat near the window, looking at the city lights, his mind full of doubts. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message, not from an investor, not from an executive, but from a young employee. The message was simple. "Thank you for standing for us. You reminded me why I believed in this company." Those words struck him deeply. He realized that sometimes a single voice of faith is enough to silence 100 voices of doubt. But just as his heart felt lighter, news arrived that shocked him. One of the biggest investors had pulled out, causing ripples across the market. Within hours, headlines painted him as reckless, too emotional, unfit to lead. This was his breaking point. He felt like the mountain was cracking beneath him. He sat in darkness, unsure if he could stand any longer. Then, as if guided by fate, Sundar received a call. It was Narendra Modi. His voice was calm, yet strong. He said, "Storms are reminders, Sundar. They test if your roots are deep enough. Remember, a tree with weak roots falls, but one with strong roots bends and rises again." Those words filled Sundar with unexpected strength. He realized he could bend, but he would not break. The night was heavy, but in his heart, a new fire began to rise. Rising after the storm, the days that followed felt like walking through fire. Sundar Pichai faced endless criticism. The media questioned. His judgment, investors withdrew support, and even allies whispered doubts. The company's future seemed uncertain, but Sundar no longer looked at the storm with fear. Narendra Modi's words about storms and roots stayed with him, and the lessons of both their fathers echoed in his mind. He told himself, "If my roots are strong, I will bend, but I will not fall." Instead of hiding, Sundar chose to stand in front of his employees. He called a company-wide meeting. Thousands gathered, both in person and online, waiting to see if their leader would collapse or fight. He walked onto the stage slowly, his face calm, but his eyes burning with quiet fire. When he began to speak, his voice was steady. "We are not here only to create technology. We are here to create trust. Our success will mean nothing if the people who build it feel unseen, unheard, or disrespected. I know this road is hard. I know we will face losses. But we must not forget that respect and kindness are not weaknesses. They are the strongest code we can ever write." The hall was silent, just as it had been when Narendra Modi spoke about his father. Silence heavy with meaning, silence filled with emotion. Sundar had created the same kind of silence, one that touches the heart deeper than applause. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, employees began to stand. Some clapped, some cried quietly, some simply raised their hands in respect. The room shook with energy, not the energy of numbers, but the energy of belief. News of this meeting spread quickly. Headlines began to change. Critics still questioned him, but the voices of support grew louder. People around the world admired the CEO who chose dignity over quick profit. A few weeks later, Narendra Modi and Sundar met again. This time there was no hall, no cameras, just a private meeting between two men shaped by the sacrifices of their fathers. Modi looked at Sundar with a gentle smile and said, "You stood firm when others wanted you to bend. That is the strength my father taught me. And you carried it forward." Sundar lowered his eyes, humbled. He replied softly, "Your words about your father reminded me of mine. I realized I had forgotten the roots that made me, but now I know. They are my true strength." The two men sat in silence for a moment, a silence filled with respect. No power, no title, no wealth could create such a moment. It was the silence of two sons remembering the men who shaped them. As Sundar walked out, the storm inside him was gone. He knew there would always be challenges, but he also knew he had something stronger than fear. He had roots. And just like his father once told him, and just like Damodardas Mulchand Modi once lived, Sundar understood that true greatness is not about climbing alone. It is about holding others while you climb.